So in this segment, we're going to continue to look at evaluating labor market models, specifically in this case, looking at equations that define the model. So let's first consider the form of these equations. You'll see that we have a labor supply equation equal to negative 10 plus 2W, or labor supply equals negative 10 plus 3 times the wage. And we have a labor demand equation equaling 20 minus W, or minus the wage. Well, this looks like a point slope form in some respects, but let's think about what we're really seeing here. The point slope form of an equation algebraically is y equals mx plus b. Well, if we think about this form, we've got some y-axis and some x-axis, but we know that on the x-axis we have labor, and on the y-axis we have wage. So we really don't have y equals mx of b here. In fact, if anything, we have x equals b plus m of y. And that's not the form that we want. We want to think about this in y equals mx of b. So how do we create this, or how do we think about this in y equals mx of b? Well, we simply rearrange this equation. So in this case, if I'm looking at the labor demand equation, I want to be able to think about this in y equals mx of b form. Then I would have to rearrange this such that I start with labor demand equaling 20 minus W, and I'll rearrange it to say W equals 20 minus LD, which then I can think about a little bit differently again as W equals negative LD plus 20, which is the same thing as Y equals MX plus B. And in this case, the m would simply be a negative 1. So this is how we can think about this as a point slope form, but remember that we're working off of just the opposite of this. It's kind of an inverse point slope form. So let's now take a little closer look at what we're really seeing here with these demand curves and these supply curves, as they help us define the market, or define the market model in this case. Well, what we'd like to do is use these two equations to form, or perhaps help plot, our demand curve, supply curve, and then think about our equilibrium. So to do this, let's go ahead and create a table that is going to inform us of what's taking place in the market here. So we're going to start by putting this table together with some W, wage, some labor supply, and some labor demand. Let's think about this. And in order to do this, we're going to start with some given W's. So you could do this either direction. You could start with a given demand or supply, and then find the W, or you could start with given W's. And more often than not, we're going to think about this in terms of being given some W, being given some wage. So I'm just going to go ahead and give us a number of different levels of wage, so we can then identify the labor supply or labor demand at that wage. So let's use 0, 2 1/2, 5, 7 1/2, 10, and then we'll jump down to 20. Well, the way that we're going to think about this then is we're simply going to plug these wages into each of these equations to find the new value of labor supply or labor demand given that W. So in this case, if we're looking at labor supply, and we'll do the labor supply column first, if we're looking at the labor supply, well, labor supply equals negative 10 plus 3 times the wage, or 3 times W, so it simply equals negative 10. And for 2 1/2, then labor supply equals negative 10 plus 3 times 2 1/2, or that's going to give us negative 2 1/2. And if we simply apply that same methodology, substituting W in the equation for the W we're given in our column, we can then just fill this out, and we see that we can go to 5, 12 1/2, 20, and then if we jump all the way down to wage of 20, we get 50. So let's do the exact same thing, but let's do it now for the labor demand curve. And we'll take labor demand equals 20 minus W. Well, 20 minus 0 is 20. And then we're just going to continue to substitute W in the equation for the W we're given. And so that will take us to 17 1/2, 15, 12 1/2, 10, and then that would help us jump to 0. Well, a couple of things that we should be noting here. First is that in the labor supply equation, which has a positive scalar in front of the right-hand variable, or the y in this case, the W, then as wage rises from 0 towards 20, the number of labor units also rises from, in this case, negative 10 to 50. So what might that look like? It's going to look something like this. It's going to be positively sloped, probably along the lines of this. And that would be a labor supply equation or curve. Well, similarly, in the labor demand equation, as wage rises, then we see the labor demand falls. Well, that would make sense to us because we have a negatively sloped line here. We know that because we have a negative scalar. So we're going to see something that's going to look something like this for labor demand. Of course, we have L on this axis, W on this axis. We also can see a point which we'll think of as equilibrium, or the market clearing level. Equilibrium simply means that we have some wage at which labor supply is going to be equal to labor demand, such that all the labor that is supplied by households in the market will be demanded by firms in the market. Well, we see that at 0, labor supply and demand do not equal each other. At 5, they don't equal each other. But at 7.5, that particular wage level brings about a equal supply and demand. So this is we're going to think about this on our graph, and it actually will be right here. And we call this point W star and L star, and we know that they have values of 12.5 in this case. Excuse me. They have values of 12 1/2 on the L axis and 7 1/2 on the wage axis. And all that really means to us then is that at a wage of 7.5, or $7.50 in this case, let's say if this was an hourly wage, then we would have a equal labor supply and equal labor demand. Recall that households supply labor. Workers live in households supply labor, and firms demand labor. So let's take a look at this yet a little differently, and we'll think about how those equations can now give us the intercept values for these. We already identified how the equations might, in a table, let us see the W star and L star, the market clearing levels, when we see that they are identical, of course, as we've noted here, when labor supply equals labor demand. But now let's see how we can think of the intercept values. Now you'll notice we can think about them by just using the table again, but there's another way to do it when we have these equations and we can express them. And so this is actually a fairly simple thing to do. Consider that on the y-axis, or on the wage axis, the value of labor is 0. And on any point on the labor axis, the value of wage is 0. So if we want to know the intercept values for the demand curve or for the supply curve, all we need to do is in turn set the variables equal to 0, and that will then reveal the intercept values. So let's do this. We'll start with labor supply. So when we've got, when wage equals 0 for labor supply, we then have labor supply equals negative 10 plus 3 times 0, or simply equals negative 10. And when labor supply equals 0, then we have 0 equals negative 10 plus 3 times the wage, or 3W equals 10, or W equals 10 over 3. 10/3 or 3 1/3. If we now consider the labor demand equation, when W equals 0, labor demand is equal to 20 minus, well, 0. It's equal to 20. And when labor demand is equal to 0, then we have the condition where 0 equals 20 minus W, or W equals 20. Now, notice that in this case, that we end up with the same value each time. That is simply coincidental based upon the structure of this equation. Were this equation structured differently with different values, we would not end up necessarily with the same value for each of these. So what this is telling us is on the labor demand relation that W equals 0, or when W equals 0, which is here, that labor demand is 20. So this is 20. And when labor demand equals 0, then W equals 20. So this is 20. This is similarly telling us for the supply relation that when the wage equals 0, the labor supply is negative 10. Well, I don't see negative space here. Recall that we actually can think about this as an extension through negative space if we think about the supply curve extending through, and this point would be negative 10. And similarly, when labor supply is 0, which is going to be right here, then the wage is going to be 10/3 or 3 1/3. So this is how we can think of the equation defining the market. So we go